Gen Z may be the most misunderstood generation. I've never seen one age group with so much criticism directed at it. I think it's over the top. I mean, I think all Gen Z is really trying to say, and let me just quote Phil from that epic movie Groundhog Day.
I'm not going to live by their rules anymore.
But honestly, it's going to be centered in who you are.
So as our resident Gen Zer here, and George, with you being Gen Z at heart, we've discovered, we wanted to, in this podcast, break down why Gen Z is so unique. Because to me, these reactions excite me, because it feels like Gen Z is on the cusp of being the freest generation ever.
And we want to get into that in this podcast, because what you're going to hear is we really truly believe Gen Z can become the greatest generation through free enterprise.
And George, it's so refreshing to hear someone from your generation actually speak positive about us Zoomers here, because all we see in the media, all I'm hearing in work is Gen Z complaints. Gen Z doesn't do this, Gen Z is not good enough at that. And then being part of Gen Z, I talk to Gen Z and we have a lot of complaints, I'll admit. We complain a lot about how this adult system that we've been brought into just doesn't seem to make any sense anymore. It doesn't seem to work anymore.
I know I'm Gen Z at heart because over my lifetime, I would see rules and I'm going like, those rules don't make any sense, and I would do something else. To give the Phil quote a little more context, he's actually driving on the railroad tracks when he says it.
Oh yeah, don't drive on the railroad tracks.
Well, Phil, that's one I happen to agree with.
So there are some rules, and we're going to get into this, that you might want to follow. That's all I'm saying. But we want to get to some very practical ways you guys can take action. But honestly, it's going to be centered in who you are.
It sounds like it's easy. It sounds simple when you say that, George, but I know from my own personal experience and a lot of my friends and other people I've went to school with, we're really struggling to know who exactly we are, that we've all been inundated by this system and it's kind of tried to feed us into it. And now that we're kind of at the brink here, we're about to be adults, we're asking, are we really these system creatures that it's created, or is there more to life? And I feel like that's the crossroads we're at right now.
Well, I've got news for you, AJ. You are an adult, whether you want to be or not. And, you know, if you go back like 200 years, you know, they started being adults like at 14, 15, and 16.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I've thought about this a lot too, as, yeah, sure, I'm an adult now and I'm adulting and all that fun stuff. But like, people used to be adults coming at 14, 15, like you said, but now I'm 23 and I don't know when the heck I'm going to be able to afford to provide 3 meals a day for a kid, or buy another car, or buy a house, or my vacations have to stay limited right now. Like, I don't know when I'm actually going to start feeling like adult. Like, I still feel like a young adult, like a college kid. I still feel like I'm in this transition phase because I feel like the development curve has been so elongated recently.
And coming against this generation, there's a lot of forces, and you came of age during this pandemic. I've talked to guys on airplanes and stuff like that. They graduated on Zoom from high school and college. You didn't get into college live for like 2 years, right?
Yeah, I graduated high school 2019, had 1 semester of college, normal. Second semester got blown up. And then the next 2 semesters after that were a mixture of all online to a hybrid learning type of thing.
So then the adults, quote unquote, the employers, your managers, your big corporations all criticize Gen Z because they're not socializing properly. Well, you were the people who messed it up.
You were the ones who took the key social years where you go from kid in the system to being an independent adult and said, no, you're going to live at home with your parents and do everything on the computer and talk to nobody else.
And get this, because I follow this stuff, right? And they're also saying, then the pandemic's over, okay? That doesn't have anything to do with you can still stay at home and not come to work. You can just click on the, just work at home alone. Oh, and then like, what was it? 15 years ago or something, these adults invented iPhones and Androids and all that kind of stuff. So we could screw up everything. There's a lot of advantages to the phones, okay? I'll admit. But look, this is a huge issue. And we don't teach our kids. Mm-hmm. I'm watching parents not understand when their toddler is watching them on the phone and not giving them attention. And why is that little box so important? And so they grab for the phone because it's obviously more important than they are. Oh, wow. I like them apples.
Man, I've never thought about that. But that's exactly what you're telling a little toddler who doesn't know any better. Whatever on that box is the coolest thing in the world. It gets all my mom or dad's attention all the time.
Oh, and it's more important than me.
Yeah, they spend more time with it than me. Like, look at their screen time. It's probably 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. And how many times do you actually spend just you and your child?
Yeah. So like you grew up, do you ever remember not seeing iPhones or phones? And it doesn't have to be an iPhone, but a phone like that, cell phones?
My very early childhood, like kindergarten-ish. And then I remember my mom got a BlackBerry for the first time, and it was the coolest thing I ever saw. And it had just a little game where you just had to move a little brick to bounce a ball back and forth. Right. It was very, very simple, but it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen as like a 6 or 7-year-old kid, whenever it was.
Yeah. So see, nobody's considering this.
And as you're saying all of that, George, this is reminding me of a poll I saw recently that Harris did for Fortune magazine, and it found that 82% of all knowledge workers think that Gen Z is lacking soft skills and interpersonal skills as they enter the workforce. And it's exactly like what you said. It's because you stepped on our development curve. You stepped on our social development, and the time when we were supposed to be getting ready to develop these interpersonal skills for you knowledge workers in the workforce, you adult knowledge workers, you just took it away from us, and then now we're complaining that we don't have the skills you took away from us.
Well, it's actually a little worse than that. And I'm going to grab a thing out of your vocabulary here and just go, it's like, where were these adults? Well, why didn't the adults at the time you're growing up in your most formative years teach you social skills with using a phone or social media? And there's all sorts of stuff on this right out there, but fundamentally that's the breakdown. And the reason they didn't show you, I can answer this question. The reason they didn't show you this because they don't know how to do it either. And they don't socialize any better than Gen Z does, but they just had a period of life where they didn't have these issues. Like there wasn't Facebook when they were growing up. There wasn't phones like that. There were telephones. There were landlines. You could get we had a 30-foot phone cord on the receiver upstairs because I have all these sisters, and you could follow the phone cord into the different rooms as to where, they're talking to all their boyfriends. So they were on the phone hours. Okay. Of course, you could pick up the downstairs phone and listen to everything they were saying.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah.
As a brother, I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, it's such a key insight right there, George, is we're being compared to 23 and 24, and we're being compared to Gen X and the boomers when they were the same age, and they didn't have any of the same pressures. They didn't have any of the same technology. And also, as they're complaining, I love how you're talking about this, because it's not finger pointing at Gen Z. There's a lot of, your thumb pointing back at your own generation, where it's like, yeah, it was your job to teach us all of this stuff, to teach us how to adapt to all of this technology. And if you're complaining about it, maybe you didn't do your job right.
Yeah, let's get into some details here, because I think this would be really helpful. Like what you're experiencing, like in your big corp job. So AJ is in the middle of big corp, and as you're developing side hustles, this being one, and trying to find that entrepreneurial main hustle. Talk about some of the stuff that's going on there.
Yeah, and that article broke it down a little bit further here. And like the interpersonal skills, just being able to connect with people and talk, that's the low hanging fruit, I feel. But I'm also hearing a lot of complaints about lack of career ambition, in the sense that previous generations, they left college, they joined the corporation, and everybody was very, very ambitious and excited to just climb up that ladder and get as high as they could. Where Gen Z is getting there and like, oh, I'm cool with this rung on the ladder. I'm happy with this rung on the ladder. And then a lot of managers are translating that as Gen Z has a low work ethic. They don't have high ambition. They don't want to work that hard. They don't want to do that much. They're just here to get a check and enjoy their life. And I think that criticism is very unfair in disregarding everything that we just talked about relating to the pressures Gen Z is facing.
Yeah, this is the unique thing I think in this generation is that my hunch is they have a different value system. And the old value system, which you and I have talked on previous podcasts on, and it bears to continue talking about, is this mentality. And it definitely starts with the boomers and their World War II generation, and then the Xers and et cetera, et cetera. And it's this whole thing actually probably started with the Social Security Act. And that is, you work for 40 some odd years, you build up your retirement, and then you retire and die. Retirement really, if you really look at what it is, it's like waiting to die. Now, you might be doing it on a nice cruise ship or something like that, but I mean, it's come on. And I've never bought into this, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's like, I think Gen Z doesn't buy into that system.
Yeah, that's a spot on observation, George, because we don't want to just enjoy the last 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years of our life, if we're lucky, collecting Social Security checks. No, we only have, average lifespans like 80 years. We want to enjoy all of it. There's no reason. We just got out of a fun childhood. Like, air conditioning's great. This technology's been fun to be around as a kid. And we don't see any reason that we can't continue to enjoy life. The world is pretty good. And so why do we have to just climb this ladder? Why is everything all about the amount of income we're bringing in and how many cruises I'm going to be able to afford when I'm 60? I think they can. Does it still have to be that model where it's 40 years, you dedicate 40 years of your life to the system so that you can get the back end back? Or I feel like we could do it all a different way.
Well, and AJ, I've got to say, it's not 60. By the time you get to the they'll have pushed it out even further. But yeah, I never bought into that system. And the illustration, and we've talked about this before, is in college, or as I was getting out of college, I borrowed all this money. Well, all my friends were borrowing money, and they were starting their new job, and they bought a car, let's say, or they were trying to, whatever they wanted to buy, get everything really nice. Mm-hmm. I didn't want any of that. I drove an old crappy VW. All right. I instead borrowed all this money and I traveled the world, Europe, Asia, the world. And it was the most transformative thing in my life, and experiencing other cultures. This was Europe on like $1 a day trip, kind of a thing. And we had a blast and we learned a ton. And it was a small group. And this is why I'm like, I get it. Literally, the system doesn't understand this generation.
Yeah. And I feel like if you were to make your process a system where after college you go and travel the world rather than go right into work, I feel like that's kind of what we're seeking to, and what you did there is you went to different cultures, you saw how they operate, you saw how they enjoy their life, how they organize their society. And that gave you, I'm sure, a ton of information on how you wanted to set up your life. And so as Gen Z is struggling with identity, if we could all travel and see what's the rest of the world doing, what are other systems that exist out there, and how do they work and bring fulfillment to people? Because most of us, especially with the cost of travel now, we can't get out of the country. We can't go see other cultures. We can't afford to go and see these other systems that we desperately need to see, I feel like.
Well, okay. I'm going to give you a little pushback on that, because when you keep bringing up like it's so expensive, look, it was really expensive back when I did it too. But here's the thing. If you think free enterprise, if you start thinking creatively, then what starts to happen is you start figuring ways around the system. You don't have to fly. You could get a berth on a boat, like a oil tanker or something. There's crazy ways you could find other ways to get across the ocean. I'm just saying.
No,
you may not want to, but this exposes you to all kinds of people. You got to get away from the tech. You got to get away from the air conditioning. You got to get out. And when you start to do that, you know what happens? It helps you begin to figure out who you are.
As you break away from the system that has tried to tell you who you are for the past, 18 years of formal public education plus college, you had another 4. They're trying to tell you who you are, and they're trying to craft you into a corporate robot, basically.
I mean, you got to get out of your growing up environment, because that's actually what I think has held Gen Z back from discovering who they are. And so, like way back in the early 60s, John Kennedy, the president, started the Peace Corps. There's mission opportunities. I mean, global kind of stuff, and immersing in other cultures. I mean, the first thing I did in another culture was a homestay in a very, very poor town, farm town in Tuscany. And I was in Tuscany, but it was still very poor. But what I discovered was the joy of that family. Later, I would find that deep in the heart of Mexico. I'm like, these people are happier than I've ever been. And they have next to nothing. This is what, and you start to realize, whoa, holy smokes, there's way more. And the thing is it's about figuring out who you are and who you're intended to be.
It's funny that you say that, because as you just brought up the Peace Corps here, George, I'm like, I would never join the Peace Corps. Those people are broke. The system has so trained us to think that any job where it's like the Peace Corps, where you're going out and doing good, that's actually bad for you, is basically what the system teaches us.
Yeah. Okay. That just clicked a story with me. Just told you I traveled. We were gone like 3 or 4 months. Okay. And you'll hear stories later, but it changed my worldview. And there was this opportunity to go, basically it was a mission field kind of opportunity. It was in the US to work with at-risk boys. Let me tell you what 100% of my mentors in the system told me. Let me just guess, AJ. What do you think they said?
Don't do that. It's going to hurt your income potential in the future. You're starting your career off on the wrong foot. You're going to be starting off way behind all of your other college peers that you're graduating with. And you're way smarter than that, George. You're destined for way more.
Right. The kinder ones would say, well, do that later once you've made some income. Let me tell you something. The 20s are the years to do that. You have nothing to lose. Take the risks now. Get used, train yourself to take risks. The system, here's the insidious thing about the system, is that it wants you to play it safe, and that kills the soul of a man. Let me say that again. The system wants you to play it safe. And for men, that kills our soul. Men are risk takers. Not crazy risk takers like driving on the railroad tracks, but we need to be stretched. We need challenges. We love that.
It's like we like to do things that only make sense to us. It only made sense to you to go out and help those at-risk kids. It only makes sense to you to go travel and take on debt to do so right out of college. And that was fun because you're and it's inspiring me right now because it's like I need to figure out what risks I need to take. Because you're now in that process, you're daring to figure out who you actually are rather than playing it safe and being like, oh, this is what everybody else is, so I'll just be like that.
Yeah. And you know what? You got to fail. You've got to fail. See, I think if Gen Z figures out any of the stuff we're talking about, they're going to explode into free enterprise. Because I think they've got the mindset, the values that are going to feed that kind of thinking. And if they grab free enterprise and they go into it, oh my gosh, they will start to change their world. And I think as the movement grows, I think it changes the world. There's so much more on this, but I'd love for you to watch this podcast right here. I think it's going to give you huge insights. And in the meantime, may you live truly free.